a former senior royal protection officer has provided an unprecedented public account, offering rare insights in the complex dynamics of safeguarding the British royal family and specifically addressing the enduring controversy linking Prince Andrew, Duke of York, with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The officer, whose final 5 years of service were dedicated protecting the now king and who also intermittently guarded Prince Andrew, participated in a remarkable discussion. This conversation involved a crime journalist and a former senior Metropolitan Police commander previously responsible for royalty and specialist protection, marking an exceptionally unusual public disclosure from a close protection professional. The officer articulated a fundamental distinction between the protection of political figures and members of the monarchy, despite identical training protocols. Royal family members receive lifelong security, a practice that necessitates new officers on an established detail conform existing methods rather than introducing significant alterations. A key principle highlighted was that effective protection is contingent upon the principal's willingness be protected, as the UK framework does not permit enforcement of security measures. The initial engagement between an officer and their principal is therefore deemed crucial. The officer recounted his first meeting with the then Prince of Wales, which occurred in a Scottish field, underscoring the importance of small compromises, such as carrying a bag, facilitate a swift departure from a venue, in cultivating a workable professional relationship. He clarified his role, stating, "You're not a servant, you're there, protect, but I'm a human, and I want the job doing." The discussion also addressed previous reports where other protection officers voiced apprehension that members of the Royalty Protection Unit had become overly familiar with their charges. These concerns included officers adopting royal mannerisms, wearing signet rings, and developing more aristocratic accents, fueling fears that their primary loyalty might have shifted from the Metropolitan Police, the royal household. The officer acknowledged observing instances of subconscious mimicry and the presence of signet rings, even recalling a moment where he inadvertently made a gesture identical his principal's. However, he maintained that from his very first day in the unit, he resolved remain authentically himself, steadfastly refusing alter his accent or engage in any form of theatrical performance. He expressed a belief that attempting to sustain such a facade throughout an entire career is ultimately unsustainable. He further emphasized that while a principal might engage in friendly interactions, they are never be considered a friend. He cited a training room example where an officer overstepped professional boundaries by unsolicitedly complimenting a principal's wife's hairstyle during an otherwise silent car journey, illustrating a clear breach of appropriate conduct. Addressing the critical matter of loyalty, the officer unequivocally stated that protection officers are employees of the Metropolitan Police, and their ultimate allegiance must be directed towards the law. Nevertheless, he conceded that this ideal was not always perfectly realized in practice. Upon joining the unit in 2001, he encountered colleagues who had served since the Close Protection Squad's effective formation in 1974, following the attack on Princess Anne. He suggested that some of these long-serving individuals, having been separated from conventional policing duties for several decades, might have genuinely come to perceive themselves as integral components of their principal's private staff, rather than as uniformed police officers. The former senior commander corroborated that he had been involved in disputes, some of which had escalated the commissioner, where a protected individual appeared believe they held proprietary rights over their assigned protection officers. The conversation then specifically shifted focus, Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein. The officer confirmed that he had occasionally worked on Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's detail, but clarified that he was never one of his dedicated personal protection officers. He stated that he knew individuals who had protected Prince Andrew for many years, including during his university education. He asserted that none of these colleagues had ever conveyed any information to him that caused discomfort or concern. He then provided crucial context regarding how officers are trained to navigate ethical dilemmas. He drew an analogy, a group of friends speeding on a moorway, explaining that ordinary individuals do not immediately report their companions the police, and protection officers are similarly not expected to report every minor transgression, However, he firmly stipulated that if an officer were witness an act that was inherently and seriously illegal, immediate action would be mandated, either at the moment of observation or through the established intelligence reporting chain. The journalist subsequently pressed for details concerning the 2001 occasion when Prince Andrew was photographed alongside Virginia Giuffre at Ghislaine Maxwell's London residence. The officer elucidated that personal protection cannot be compelled. A principal retains the authority to instruct their security detail stand down. He explained that at a private house party, particularly in a mews property, characterized by a single front entrance, the most effective protective measure might involve maintaining external observation from a vehicle rather than insisting on an internal presence. The officer himself recalled meeting Ghislaine Maxwell around 2002 during a cinema outing, noting he only remembered her due to the notorious death of her father, Robert Maxwell. He explicitly stated he could not confirm whether Jeffrey Epstein was present at that specific encounter, emphasizing that at that particular time, Epstein was merely one of thousands of acquaintances, largely unknown to the general public. Regarding Epstein's private island, the officer pointed out that while the host nation typically holds primacy for protection, the owner of a private island possesses the authority to dictate who may be present on their property. Epstein could theoretically have refused the presence of protection officers, a scenario that would have necessitated a discussion between the principal and the security team. He dismissed as fanciful the suggestion that a principal would commit a crime in the direct presence of police officers, whose professional role includes being highly capable witnesses. The most contentious segment of the interview pertained Prince Andrew's 2010 visit Manhattan, where he stayed at Epstein's mansion. This visit occurred after Epstein had already been convicted in 2008 of sexual offences against minors. The journalist contended that the Royal Protection Team must have been aware they were accompanying their principal, the residence of a convicted sex offender. The officer countered this assertion by explaining that Epstein's conviction was a localized Florida case at the time, and had not yet escalated in the globally saturated news it later became. He stated that he had encountered thousands of individuals throughout his career and could not be expected to know the criminal history of every single person. He further clarified that police protocols do not involve conducting background checks on every individual who attends a reception. The journalist persisted, asserting that Epstein was extraordinarily well known within the United States, and that his conviction was common knowledge, implying that the protection team should have been fully informed. The officer responded that meeting a convicted paedophile, while undoubtedly immoral, does not constitute an illegal act, and he could not speak the specific knowledge held by individual officers. Attention then shifted Paul Page, a former uniformed officer and convicted fraudster who had claimed that Prince Andrew was given an extremely derogatory nickname by his protection detail. The officer dismissed Page as an unreliable source. He clarified that Page was never a close protection officer, serving instead as part of the broader outer security contingent, and therefore would not have possessed intimate knowledge of the principal. The officer stated he had never heard the alleged nickname, and only became aware of it through foreign broadcasts that did not censor the term. He conveyed that his serving colleagues wished it be known that Page is not considered a credible source of information. The officer expressed significant frustration that protection officers, bound by strict confidentiality protocols and police regulations, are effectively denied a public voice to defend themselves against misrepresentation. He vividly described reacting strongly, even throwing his shoes at the television when watching fictional portrayals of their profession. Nevertheless, he maintained that the overwhelming majority of officers are honest, caring professionals who are solely dedicated performing their duties properly. On the specific question of whether Prince Andrew's detail might have deliberately withheld information from the Metropolitan Police, the officer stated he could not speak for every individual officer. However, based on his knowledge of his colleagues, he expressed a belief that they would have acted in accordance with appropriate conduct. The established mechanism for reporting any wrongdoing would involve an initial report a team leader, which would then progress through the command chain, ultimately reaching the commissioner. The former senior commander confirmed that any illegal act witnessed by a police officer would be expected be reported directly to the highest authority. Following the officer's departure, the journalist and the former police leader reflected on the revelations. The journalist expressed continued unease regarding the 2010 New York incident, finding it baffling that a close protection team would seemingly be unaware they were escorting their principal, the residence of a convicted paedophile. The former police leader shared some of this astonishment, but offered a more nuanced interpretation. He suggested that even if the officers were aware of Epstein's criminal record, their professional mandate was not make moral judgments about whom Prince Andrew chose meet. He posited that they might have been personally disgusted, or perhaps not, given their long-standing professional association with Andrew. He concluded that this was a question for those individual officers' address. The distinction between immorality and illegality was underscored as critical, with officers not tasked with policing morality. However, the former police leader also observed that a competent advance party would routinely conduct thorough research on a venue and its host simply assess potential threats, making it difficult to comprehend how the name Jeffrey Epstein would not have been flagged during such a process. The conversation concluded with the confirmation that the Metropolitan Police are actively engaging with Prince Andrew's former protection officers. These individuals are considered significant witnesses in a substantial criminal inquiry, and their interviews are anticipated address the numerous outstanding questions. The journalist emphasized that inquiries in what officers observed on Epstein's island and around his Manhattan mansion will persist, and that the force's most skilled detectives are likely conducting these crucial interviews. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has consistently denied any wrongdoing, and all allegations against him remain unproven.